Hello, Richard.
Hello, Patrick.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Looking very.
Well, good. We only see you, which is great because that's the point of us being here tonight. So I think you can just hear my voice as I kind of begin to welcome everybody to back to the second installment of A River Runs Through It, a Lenten pilgrimage. And we are coming to you in many different locations, and I'm excited to welcome Richard back to be with us. And so for those of you who are new, basically we are going to enjoy the company of Richard Sewell and Dr. Richard. What time is it in Jerusalem right now?
It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
So we're going to enjoy the company of a man who is in Jerusalem at 2 o'clock in the morning. And thank you.
I'm always up at this time.
But a couple of things to before we start. We would like for you to use the chat function as well as the Q&A function. As we go along, go ahead and type in your question. We have people in the background who are watching those questions, and they'll kind of collect those based on topics and stuff to kind of keep them moving along. And also to remember to donate your money to the ministry of St. George's College, which could use it right now because of the pandemic. The budget has been impacted rather adversely. So I wanted to make sure that you, as a good priest might, ask you to be good stewards of your money and give some of it to St. George's College, and to also ask questions. But Richard, this is your time, and so with that, I will turn it over to you, and I'm glad to see you, friend.
Great to see you, Patrick. Great to know that we're joined by so many people around the world, and it's been delightful to engage with people through these weeks of Lent. I've had lots of interactions with people by email and on Facebook, and thank you for your lovely comments. It's been just a wonderful experience. Somebody said using the Lent course was the most Lenten thing they'd ever lented, and I enjoyed that. Thank you. And we now approach the sharp end of Lent. We're in Passiontide. We're about to come to Palm Sunday and Holy Week, and all the drama of that. It's an intense experience. It should be intense. If you've got to do daily work, whatever that might be, then you engage with it in a different way. As a priest, it's always a really intense time as you're taking services each day. And here in Jerusalem this year will be something unusual. Last year, in Holy Week, we were in very tight lockdown and we couldn't go out of the cathedral close, out of the college grounds, except to buy essential food. This year, we will be able to really participate a bit more in some events and church life. And I hope wherever you are that you can do some of that in person, perhaps, or else perhaps your church now, far more than last Lent or Holy Week, is able to do things online for you, in addition, of course, to this course. So as the foundation piece, or the centerpiece of our webinar today, I've got a short presentation for you, which hopefully Samantha is going to be able to add in some photographs to make it more interesting than just looking at my talking head with my beautiful background, but that will help to illustrate what I'm talking about. And the theme is another aspect of the physicality of the context of the Holy Land. And I've called this Cave and Rock Theology in the Land of the Holy One. The Holy Land is, amongst many things, a rocky land. Many of the rock formations of the landscape are striking and eye-catching. I'm not a geologist, professional or amateur, so I cannot talk about this scientifically, but just as one who has now travelled this land quite widely. It's not only the Holy Land in which ancient peoples used caves as homes. It's obvious that caves would be considered suitable places for dwellings because they are dry, sheltered, and defendable. Nevertheless, it comes as a big surprise to many people to visit Bethlehem and to learn that Jesus was born not so much in a stable as in a cave. There may well have been a wooden structure attached to the cave to extend the space, but still, the place of shelter for the Holy Family would have been a cave, because in biblical times that is where most people did live. We are all familiar with the idea that Jesus was buried in a stone tomb, but it is only when you come to the Holy Land that you realize quite how prevalent rock tombs were. Scattered all over Jerusalem, for instance, you can find literally hundreds of tombs hewn out of the rocky terrain in which Jerusalem is set. So, we can see that Jesus started and ended his earthly life in a cave, and that would not have been an unusual occurrence. Nevertheless, some have used the term cave theology to describe something of the particularity of Jesus' incarnation in this land. This idea has also been strengthened by the fact that the monastic movement in Egypt and Palestine also established itself in the 4th and 5th centuries in caves. Monks sought solitude or isolated communities by taking up residence in caves. Part of the reason for this was that as homes and houses increasingly became brick and wood structures, the simplicity of the cave connected the monks to Jesus and his birth, life, and death. In what ways can this be a help to us in our faith and in our lives today? Firstly, I think it should be a reminder of the importance of simplicity of living. Jesus, the Son of the living God, was born in nothing more than a simple cave, also home to animals. This contradicted a common expectation that the Messiah would be born into a royal household, presumably with all the wealth and privilege that would bring. We too, especially in Lent, do well to remember that our materialistic desires for more, the latest, the greatest, the best performing anything, puts us out of step with the one we seek to follow. Secondly, one of the important lessons of the tomb cave in which Jesus was buried was that the place which should have been the loss of hope and life became the place where death and darkness were decisively defeated. The cave now has a chapel-like structure built over it, which masks the physical reality of the cave. But a first-century burial tomb just a few yards away gives us a very good sense of Jesus' place of burial as it would have been at the time of his death. This was the place of desolation and grief for Mary, Jesus' mother, for Mary Magdalene, and for all the women who prepared Jesus' body and placed him in the cave tomb. 3 long, grief-stricken days later, that dark, gloomy cave was flooded with the light of the resurrection. Every year, this moment of transforming light is reenacted with the extraordinary holy fire ceremony of the Orthodox Church's Easter celebrations. Because of this, Christians forever hear Pope John Paul II's affirmation, "Do not despair. We are the Easter people, and Hallelujah is our song." There may have been many times in the past year when, suffering the multiple impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, we have been prone to despair. Missing the company and comfort of family and friends, landmark life events cancelled or diminished, loss of income and purpose, crippling illness and possibly grief at the death of people we know. Some or all of these will have touched us this past year. Life has altered in ways we could not have imagined. There has been ample cause for despair in all of that. So it gives us a close connection with the trauma of what the disciples saw unfolding before them in the final days of Jesus' life, culminating in his grueling and pain-racked crucifixion and death. Hope died and was buried in a cave. But for Christians, every day is an Easter day, and if we can tap into the resurrection truth, then we have the means to counter every cause of despair. This is cave theology from a rocky land, but it holds true in every land, rocky and cave-pocked or not. I find it interesting that Jesus chooses to rename Simon the fisherman Peter the Rock. Peter, in his early discipleship, was all over the place, putting his foot in the wrong place, speaking out of turn and often saying entirely the wrong thing. But on those unpromising beginnings, Jesus placed the formation of the early church community. Jesus told a parable which was so powerful it has entered into common language usage. He contrasted a house built on sand, which collapsed under the assault of the elements, with the house built on rock, which was able to stand firm. This was the clear implication for Peter, who would be that solid foundation on which the Christian community could be founded, and from which it would grow into a global force of transformation. Matthew locates Peter's declaration at Caesarea Philippi in the foothills of Mount Hermon, in the far north of this country. In Jesus' time, it was a thriving Roman town, with a very significant Roman temple dedicated to Pan, the god of nature and fertility. No one who has ever visited that now long-ruined ancient town can fail to miss the power of Jesus' words that Peter would be a rock as solid as this great rock formation. Just in the past year or so, the remains of a 5th century church have been discovered, built into the rock face, supplanting the Roman temple of Pan. Archaeologists are speculating that the church was most likely dedicated to St. Peter, whose declaration of Jesus as the Messiah was, according to traditions, made here. In John's Gospel, Jesus' time on earth ends not with a dramatic ascension into heaven, but with a simple meal of cooked fish on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Amongst other churches founded along that northern shore, there is one dedicated to this meal and to Jesus' transformational restitution of Peter after his devastating triple denial in the midst of the maelstrom of Jesus' passion. The church is built on and around a rock on the beach, which is a beautiful illustration of a church, the church, founded on the imperfect but determined faith of St. Peter. That rock shows the erosion of sea and sand, but still stands firm beneath the church of the primacy of St. Peter. This time it is not cave theology, but rock theology, which the author of the first letter of Peter, whether that was the apostle himself or not, beautifully develops. In that pastoral communique, the author commends all those who follow Jesus to come to him as a living stone, built together as a spiritual house. Indeed, rather than glorying in Peter's prime place, he declares that this holy priesthood is founded upon Christ himself as the cornerstone, the firmest of all foundations. That firm foundation serves us well in times of trial and difficulty. We may waver or wobble in these difficult days, but a faith which has been flooded with the light of the resurrection and is rock-like in uncertain times will see us through all challenges with our eyes fixed firmly on our Saviour, the cornerstone.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and kind of I probably have some sermon fodder from that. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's a gift.
I've decided that the Christmas Eve and Easter sermons are the most difficult to write because everybody already knows those stories, at least in my church.
Yep. True.
So I'm always looking for a new way to bring a story that everyone's familiar with. We have some questions, I believe, as we kind of went along. Some of them are just trying to help us do this as a matter of reminder. This is the second time we've done this, and we continue to kind of learn as we go, bravely on into the fog. But we have some questions here, I believe. A lot of people were kind of worried about a microphone, but we'll and so everyone, the first round of questions were all helpful questions of feedback that there was a microphone being shuffled somehow and somewhere. I guess since I don't see anybody kind of putting one up yet, Richard, I asked you last time, and it was one of the I thought one of the more interesting things for me anyway, that you still find your time in the Holy Land, you still find some magic, you still find some inspiration and joy, and you don't get jaded by going into these sites. And you mentioned Joppa, where Jonah kind of had left. And so I'll ask you then, what's your second most inspirational place as you have managed to live in the Holy Land and serve there at St. George's?
Well, yeah, Patrick, you're right. I mean, this place is the most extraordinary context in which to live, and to have the city of Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, just down the road, and to be able just to wander into the city is a constant source of amazement and inspiration. Just yesterday, because a friend told me that a very good friend of theirs had died, he asked if I could go and light a candle in the Holy Sepulchre and say a prayer for her. So I took that chance, and within just over 10 minutes, there I was in a virtually empty Holy Sepulchre, because, with the pandemic, we still have no pilgrims here whatsoever. So that's an incredible privilege. And mostly they have a barrier in front of the tomb itself. You saw a picture of the tomb. So the cave, which I was talking about, the cave in which Jesus was buried, was initially just had a sort of a cage around it. And then that got damaged through earthquakes, because this is a real earthquake zone. I mean, it's slightly concerning that it's been well over 100 years since the last serious earthquake. And so we're due for one, because they normally come easily every 100 years, but damaged through earthquake. And then in about the 19th century, towards the end of the 19th century, a stone structure was built over the cave. And that's what's called the Edicule. Edicule is a Latin word simply meaning little house. So a little house was built on top of the cave of Jesus's burial. And normally there's a queue of hundreds of people to get in and have your few moments kneeling in front of the altar, which has been put on top of the place of burial. But yes, and yet in the pandemic, it's mostly been blocked off because they don't want people going in and contaminating with their germs without knowing, so they keep a barrier. But yesterday there was a priest who was just coming out, having cleaned it, and I asked humbly if I might just go in, and I was able to step in and just spend a few moments saying a prayer for Jude, for her eternal rest. And I mean, it is always, for me, the most extraordinary experience. Well, less so when there's a grumpy priest on the door telling me, time to come out, which didn't happen yesterday, but often does when you've got a long queue, partly because otherwise people will stay in there taking selfies. You're not supposed to take photos in there at all. But that is always, for me, a place of the most extraordinary, that moves me deeply. and to be able to wander around the Holy Sepulchre, the church with its various chapels of Golgotha, which is just a short distance away, but within, as I said last time, within the same church. But Patrick also, I mean, everyone will have seen the films of me now doing the talks in the different places. And to spend time simply quietly by the shore of the Sea of Galilee is also one of my most treasured times. And I know many of you, looking at these films and hearing me talk about it, those of you who've been are yearning to come back. So many of you have reached out to me and said, we just so want to come back. And you've not been able to make it happen yet, but that is in process, I know, for a number of you. And even here, you know, I yearn to be back in Galilee and just to spend time wandering around quietly by the shore on the rocks, just contemplating. It is really very, very special.
So the cave that's underneath the Edicule or inside the Edicule, that was carved. Somebody creates that. So there's a question that's popped up about the Manger Cave. So the cave underneath the Nativity, Church of the Nativity. Now, is that I've never asked that question. Is that something that was sort of man-made, or are those sort of naturally created
well,
geology
I don't know
structures?
whether Sam can bring up the picture of the Nativity again. Maybe not. I think the technology is a bit complicated. No, she can't. She's telling me. But so I had a photograph of the what you might say it's the grotto,
Yeah, right.
which has the end altar, and on the floor there is a 14-pointed star, which, I mean, of course, nobody knows the exact spot, but long tradition from before the church was built in the 4th century located that area and that cave as the place where it's thought that Jesus was born. It's located actually in a larger cave. So when you're down in the grotto, if you look up, you've got bedrock above your head. So you are in that grotto in a cave itself. And then when the church was founded in under the jurisdiction of Queen Helena, the mother of Emperor Constantine, and Helena was a deeply committed Christian, her son Constantine rather less so, she went and talked to the local Christians to find where the places were that the local Christian community associated with Jesus's life, death, and ministry, and that place. And so they said, yeah, here, this is where we come when we want to pray. This is the holy place of Jesus's birth. So she oversaw the building of a church on that spot and everything above. So the Church of the Nativity is a church built over a cave. And actually, early times, when it was first built, there was you could look down from the basilica of the church into the cave from above. Then later on, in Justinian time, in the time of Emperor Justinian, a platform was built over it so that you could actually, the modern, or not modern, but less ancient altar sits right on top of the grotto. And in order to get into the cave of the birth, Patrick, you know, you go down 20 very steep steps. And if you've got people pushing you behind, you might trip and fall down. And then you step down into the grotto, the cave, where it is thought the Holy Family were sheltering, because the inn itself had no room.
We have a couple of questions about Holy Week, and what do you think will be permitted for you in the old city, like the Via Dolorosa? Will that happen? What do you?
We're a little bit unclear. I mean, we're coming out of lockdown. Each week we're getting a few more freedoms, but they are still. And here's a warning to you all. I guess hopefully you won't need to be told this. But if you come out too quickly and too many close contacts are had, even when you've got the high levels of vaccination that we've got, the virus can just take hold again, particularly with the new variants that are doing the rounds. So the government here, the Israeli government, is being very, very cautious, and particularly because we've got the Jewish festival of Pesach, or Passover, starting this weekend, when you would often have huge family gatherings and community gatherings inside. They're trying to really warn people not to do that. So we do not yet have full permission to do everything. But we are hopeful that we will be able to do the Palm Sunday procession. So people may know that one of the very unusual things of this land is that we've got all the denominations of Jesus's beautiful body on earth here in the Holy Land and in the Holy City. So every denomination you've ever heard of, and many that you've never heard of. But the Orthodox churches have their Easter, and in fact also their Christmas, at a different date to the Western Church, the Latin Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and all the other Protestant denominations and Anglican. Actually, the Orthodox Easter will take place 1 month after our Easter Day, a week on Sunday. So we're working with two calendars all the time. And it does make things very confusing for churches. But the Catholic and Western churches have our Palm Sunday this Sunday, of course, as do you. And we're hoping there'll be a procession from the Church of Bethphage, which is well, you go up on the Mount of Olives, and then it's about another 15-minute walk from there. But usually on Palm Sunday, there's a huge procession with the marching bands of pipes and drums of the Scouts, because that's a tradition here, picked up, I think, from time of British Mandate at the beginning of the 20th century, and the Scottish pipes and drums. So we have all of that. It's amazing. They're in bits of tartan, and it's very strange, but it's absolutely amazing. Have you ever seen that, Patrick? The pipes and drums?
We actually have a high school here in Houston, Texas, St. Thomas Episcopal High School, and they have a pipe and drum corps that they're known for.
Right. Well,
so
in the Holy Land we have that, and it's amazing. And they're very so they would pipe and drum us on our not terribly authentic to Jesus's time, but it creates an incredible atmosphere. And then, as I was alluding to in the film, we would process down the Mount of Olives. 2 years ago, I was on that walk, that procession. It was incredibly moving, very, very busy. And then all the clergy in their finery, their robes, showing off their beautiful cassocks and many, many other things. It's a joyous occasion. And of course, we've picked up palm branches or olive branches as we go, and we're waving them. We are really hoping that will happen on Sunday. And if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and it does happen, I will post stuff up there, maybe even a very, very short, few seconds of a film. But I will do that walk anyway. Even if there's no procession, we can still now, this year, we can still go and do these things on our own or in small groups. And on Maundy Thursday, after our service and Eucharist or foot washing ceremony on Maundy Thursday night, we will walk from there 10, 12 minutes or so to the Garden of Gethsemane. And we'll spend time as in our congregation praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I'm sure that will happen.
One of the things, sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious about these pipe and drum that got me thinking, and somebody kind of brought up an idea about when Jesus is making this procession and is getting criticized, and he said if he told everybody to be quiet, even the stones themselves would. So I'm curious if you have anything you wanted to comment about that, as far as like because the topography, right, if I remember correctly, is like you come to that church, you come up, and then you're on the Mount of Olives, but then you're going to make your way down towards the Teardrop Church, and then you go farther down, and then come back up into the city. So if Jesus is making that kind of route, he didn't have a pipe and drum corps, but he had the assurance that if they were to be quiet, then all of the stones would
Yeah,
erupt.
yeah.
So,
You know, I mean, I believe that this land does still proclaim the glory of God, and that you see it and you feel it when you walk the land. And I see it and feel it. And it was interesting when we were recording the film from the Teardrop Church, which some of you may have seen this week for part 5. So that's the point. Again, we don't know where Jesus stopped and cried, but a church has been there from the 4th or 5th century. And standing there doing that recording, I noticed that we seemed to be at almost the exact height of the domes of the Holy Sepulchre, so that they were at eye level for me. So it touched me when I thought that the place where Jesus cried over for the sadness of Jerusalem and for the prophets who had lost their lives in past times was at the place where you could see the top of the quarry where Jesus was crucified. It sort of, I then made this wonderful spiritual connection between Jesus's grief and sadness over Jerusalem, its past, and its present, and actually, of course, we believe for its future, and all the death and destruction and oppression that has occurred in this city makes that connection between his tears and the place of crucifixion. If you took off one of the silver domes, which is over the point of very near where Jesus was crucified, you'd be able to see the top of the quarry where he was crucified. That was Golgotha, and the church was built right over the top of it.
Mm. So speaking of weeping over Jerusalem, there's a lot to weep about still, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza. And I know that there's constantly something for you and the ministry that you have at St. George's to kind of brief us on. There's a couple of questions about this as far as helping us to always understand the situation a little bit better, the nuances that are involved. So in the future that Jesus weeps over, that we are here now. So there was a question earlier about the election. I don't know if you want to touch on that, but also about the situation. We did not know when we were together in February about vaccines into the West Bank and Gaza. So I'll give you 2 loaded questions in the middle of the night there where you are, to maybe comment about the election, and then comment on the health and well-being of our Palestinian brothers and sisters.
Well, people may know that we've had our 4th election, can you believe, in 2 years?
Because yes, we can. We're in the United States of America. We understand crazy elections now.
Anything can happen. Well, these are not because the election was disputed, but because they were inconclusive, because we have a system of proportional representation here. So it means that you don't have, like in the UK, where we have a first past the post system, which actually can create solid government because it privileges 1 or 2 parties, but it underprivileges or marginalizes minority views. Here, in a system of proportional representation, it creates a situation almost inevitably of less stable government, but it privileges minority viewpoints. And here there are multiple minority viewpoints politically and religiously. You've got some extreme far right views represented, and then because the largest single party, in order to govern, has to have a coalition of small parties in order to form the government, will make promises to these little crazy parties to say, if you come into the government with me, I will look after your special interest, which may be all sorts of horrible things. And the last 3 elections, and almost certainly the one that took place on Tuesday, will create that same situation. And at the moment, they're still counting. The final results should come out tomorrow. It looks again like there's no one party that can form a government, that'll have to be coalition. And it's a little difficult to say, but it looks like Netanyahu's position is weakened this time. And he may not be able to form a government at all. So, well, we may have to go straight into another election. Can you believe that? Yeah. Or it may mean that the other party, which are more of the center and towards the left, but the center left is still extremely conservative in its politics in lots of ways, but along with maybe 1 or 2 of the Arab parties, which would be a first for Arab parties to be in government. But I would just say watch the news tomorrow. Maybe I would think as you're getting up tomorrow morning that something may be more clear as to what's happened. But it's not. I mean, even at the best outcome, it's not going to significantly change anything. My fear is that if Netanyahu won again and he went in with more of the extreme right parties, it would make further annexation of the West Bank far more likely. Now, Netanyahu threatened that, and under Donald Trump, that was looking more likely because he was not trying to dissuade them, didn't seem to be doing so in public anyway. But if the other parties get in, then annexation, in other words, Israel taking more control of more of the Palestinian areas, and that would be extremely bad news. And there is still some fear, though I suspect that under Biden's administration, that would be quashed. But unfortunately, the way things are here is that even if publicly the government turns away from a certain course of action, quietly behind the scenes, they do it anyway. And that's what has been happening with Jewish settlements in the West Bank. So now 500,000 Israeli Jews live in the West Bank in illegal settlements, although they have been condemned under international law and were not under the Oslo Accords, were not supposed to happen, but they've been happening all the time. And there have been more settlements built in the last 18 months than in any 18-month period prior to that. So, yeah, the election, where there are still many things to be decided, and it's concerning.
And is the vaccine getting into Gaza and the West Bank at all?
Yes, little bits. I mean, thankfully now the Palestinian workers who come into Jerusalem and other parts of Israel to work on a daily basis, they have, I think, maybe all been vaccinated now. That's taken place over the last 2 weeks. And our Palestinian staff who've been coming in to work half-time since the pandemic have had their, both of them have had 1 shot and waiting for the 2nd shot. But that's only 110,000 people. The other, so there are 4 million Palestinians living in the West Bank and 2 million Palestinians who live in Gaza. And a mass program of vaccination has not happened at all. And the virus is raging very badly. Thankfully, not yet in Gaza, but in the West Bank, it's worse than it has ever been. The Church of the Nativity has closed again because it's not considered safe. And all the big cities of the West Bank, that's Bethlehem, Ramallah, Nablus, Hebron, all of those are in levels of lockdown, and the hospitals are full. It's really, we are really worried about that. So that's for your prayers over the weekend, that the international community, I mean, I'm hoping that now after the election, some new possibility will come, because Israel owes it to the Palestinians. I mean, many Israelis would say that they don't owe that, but I think many people think they do. And actually, it won't protect Israel if because lots of people go in and out of the West Bank, and if the virus is raging and variants are developing, that will affect the health and security of Israel itself.
We're almost out of time, and so there was really a great question, and I'm all for that. This question involves why you named the river running through the desert. I appreciate the symbolism of water and life in the middle of nothing like that. So I'm curious why you chose to name this "A River Runs Through the Desert" as a part of our Lenten pilgrimage.
Well, it's part of the Old Testament imagery that the prophets and the psalmists talk about. And because from my desert film, you can see that, we have an idea of desert as rolling sand dunes and all of that. But the desert is transformed in the rainy season, and comes to life, and the dry wadis become flowing with water, and the dry hills and mountains spring up grass and beautiful wild flowers. And the Old Testament prophets and psalmists talk about this as the way that God transforms individuals and communities from those which are dry and parched and lacking in life, that through the love and life of God, we are brought to life. And so just as the dry valley flows with a river in the rainy season, so the life of God will flow through his people when they turn to him and worship him and give our lives to him. And so in Lent, I think our lives are refreshed and renewed and revitalized by the love and grace of God. And so I thought that idea of the river running through the desert was a beautiful image for our Lenten journey from Ash Wednesday to Easter Day.
So we have one more journey to go along with you. We have your Holy Week work and the Stations video. And if you would just kind of give us a little teaser on that, and then anything else you want to say, and I'll let you end it, but I'll say thank you from all of us. So go ahead.
So I've talked about Palm Sunday, and we're looking forward to that and hoping we can do our procession. But Palm Sunday starts with joy and leads us into the extraordinary events of Jesus's final days. And each day brings its own things that we commemorate and mark, whether it be the raising of Lazarus. And in the Orthodox Church, that features very much so actually on the Saturday before Palm Sunday. And it's a story of life after death. And so I commend that to you as a way of entering into the events of Holy Week. And then we travel through those traumatic events of Jesus's Last Supper, of his nurturing of the disciples, preparing them for what lies ahead, then of his dramatic arrest in Galilee, in Gethsemane, his trial, and then his crucifixion and the walk from the place of his condemnation to his place of crucifixion. And so people will know from their own liturgical journeys through Holy Week that the Stations of the Cross is part of what many churches do. Here in Jerusalem, it's a physical thing. We walk through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, marking those events, those 14 places which punctuate his final hour, carrying his cross to Golgotha. And that's something that happens day in, day out here in Jerusalem. And tomorrow morning, first thing, I'm hoping that Bishop Assam and his wife Rafa, my wife Julianne, and Don Binder and Chris Binder will we will do that walk, the way of the cross, the 14 stations, and we'll record it, edit it into something a little bit shorter, and then post it on YouTube. And the link will come to you in the usual way that you've received all the other Lenten materials through this, so that at some point, either individually or maybe corporately, you will be able to share in that journey from Jesus's condemnation. And then we will end on the roof of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The roof is a large flat area because you can't do services like that, short liturgies, devotions within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but on the roof is a beautiful place. And we finish there over the place of Golgotha and over the place of Jesus's burial. And then we'll walk down into the church and we'll say a prayer in front of the Holy Sepulchre, and all of that will be recorded. And I hope that will be something really special. It's it's a gift from us here at the college to all of you, our friends, our supporters. And I hope that will be something that you'll be able to share in one way or another. And all of this, all of our liturgies, our prayers, our services, that you will all be entering into in this next week, are a way of seeking to bring us close to Jesus himself. And when we walk closely with Jesus, our life makes more sense. Our life is redeemed and directed. When we find ourselves closely in the company of Jesus, our own views and perspectives are challenged and transformed. And that's what we seek to do in all of our worship and our life and our pilgrimage and through Lent, is to allow the love of Christ, who in all his dealings showed that remarkable compassion and ability to see people's hearts and their real needs. And that's what we're asked to do, is to look at the world with compassion and love, to strive for justice and for peace, not simply be concerned with our own interior life, but to allow our words and our actions, both individually and corporately, to make that love and grace of Christ known in reality. And when we get to Easter Day and the great joy of the resurrection of Christ, the victory of life over death, our lives too should show, even in these still very difficult days, that joy can break through the sadness and the darkness that many of us have felt and known over this past year. And I pray, Patrick, that everybody who's shared in this Lenten journey will know that Easter joy, which, as Pope John Paul so memorably said, we are the Easter people. Easter is the very core of us, and hallelujah is our song.
Well, Richard, thank you for being awake in the middle of the night.
I'm going back to bed now.
Keeping watch. You can go back to bed. I just want to thank everybody who participated tonight and for your support of St. George's and the Ministry of Pilgrimage there. Thank you to Nancy Brockway and Samantha Smith, who were behind the scenes making this happen. Also to remind everybody who's still with us that you can still make a donation for this ministry that is so important and needed. I think for those of us who have made pilgrimages, our lives have been forever changed for the good. And so, Richard, thanks for leading St. George's and changing lives, and for doing these remote videos and having the courage to turn yourself into a TV star. And please tell your wife hello. And with that, I think we're done. So good night, everybody, and stay safe.
And thank you, everybody, for all that you've given. I mean, so many people, Patrick, have given already. And so thank you to you it makes a real difference to us. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.